My name's David Vickery. I was the visual effects supervisor and second unit director of Jurassic World Rebirth.
The mosasaurus. We found it?
No, it found us.
One of the big differences on this project was we had a very different director on board. And it's interesting to me how different a director can make a film. And so Gareth Edwards came on this show, and he's obviously got a huge, big background in visual effects. He knows how to do it. He's a visual effects artist at heart. The big difference in the first instance was that he embraced visual effects. It wasn't something that he pushed away and was scared about. He was really looking forward to post-production. He brought the visual effects team in and engaged them in all parts of the process. When we got onto the project, we started just at the end of February 2024. And before we even had a director on, the release date of the film had been announced to be in June 2025. So we only had 14 months to do the project from start to finish. Now, we had other deadlines on the way as well. And one of those was designing the dinosaurs, not for the film, but for the toy manufacturers, because the lead time on creating the toys, designing them, building the molds, releasing them and getting them into the shops was even longer than the film. So we had a very rapid sprint at the beginning of the production where we had to try and design all of these creatures in a short space of time. Because there was such a short timeline on this project, and because most of our film was going to take place in Thailand, or at least be shot in Thailand. Now, it's like a 16-hour flight to get to Thailand, and then you have to deal with the jet lag. And because we only had 12 weeks to prep, we only went to Thailand once before we started filming. We went once on a tech scout. And so in order to help Gareth plan the film, what we did is, whilst we were out in Thailand, we shot 360 videos in every single set we went to. Just did a simple walk around all the way around the set with this selfie stick 360 camera. And we LiDAR'd every single location. The goal was that when we got back to the UK, our previous company, Proof, processed all those 360 videos in through reality capture and used post-shot draw set to create gaussian splats of those locations, so that we could give Gareth, he could either take a VR headset and walk around the locations and view them again, or he had a VCAM system which was rigged with the same lens package John Matheson was going to use to shoot the film. And he could virtually lens all the shots in his film. And he had this free roaming studio space that he could walk around in. And basically, within those Gaussian splats, we gave them to our production designer, and he then built virtual replicas of the sets in the Gaussian splats. So we could take a virtual camera, a virtual set, and a representation of the locations, and just basically try and plan exactly how we were going to shoot the movie. Some directors take Previs, and they use that as a tool to map out exactly how they want a sequence to be filmed. Gareth takes Previs as a stepping stone. It's a version 1 of his idea. And he looks at that Previs and he says, these ideas worked, these ideas didn't. And then he uses that to evolve his creative process when he gets to the set. So it's not a surprise that when Gareth shoots a sequence, it looks very different from the Previs. It's not because he didn't like the Previs, it's because he was working out ideas during the Previs stage that worked for him and others that didn't. And then he will very much react to the natural landscape around him when he's filming and react to things that are going on in front of him. So it's natural that his ideas evolve as better things take shape in front of him. There's a boat in the scene called the Essex that gets attacked by a mosasaur and a number of spinosaurs. So I realized water, in visual effects, water was going to be a real challenge for us. When it came to shooting, we very quickly realized that we weren't going to be able to take a real boat out on the sea and shoot it for real, because there were just a number of different factors that played into it. The boat itself was so loud and noisy and kicked out diesel smoke out the back, so we couldn't record sound. People started getting seasick out in the open ocean. We had to have a small armada of support boats following us everywhere we went, with the costume department, the stunt department, the ADs, the sound department. We had no control over other ocean-going traffic. So in the end, we opted to shoot the sequence on a tank in Malta on dry land. We didn't put any water in the tank either, because Having water in the tank made shooting prohibitively slow. We couldn't move the camera where we needed to move it. So I realized water was a massive, massive challenge. We were going to have to do CG, water, and ocean surfaces. There were over 300 shots that feature CG water in the movie, and only 10% of those shots had any real water in them at all. We believe dinosaurs because they were real animals that did exist at some point in time. So you can suspend your disbelief when they're on screen. They're not mythical creatures. But if you don't believe the environments that the dinosaurs are in, you don't believe the dinosaurs themselves. So it was really important that everyone that watched the film believed that that boat was out on the open ocean and actually performing in the real world. Neil Corbold, our special effects supervisor, built an enormous motion base and then built a full-scale replica of the Essex boat and mounted it on the motion base. You could rotate it in 360 degrees, could pitch it forwards and backwards and sideways up to 45 degrees. But we had to figure out how to move the boat to make it feel convincing that it was on the ocean. So Neil took a replica of the Essex out to sea and he covered it with inertial motion sensor units so that he could understand exactly how the boat pitched around and moved at different speeds when it did different maneuvers. And then he used all that data to program the motion base on dry land so that our set of the Essex moved in exactly the same way. The raft sequence, obviously, it's this hugely iconic sequence from the original Jurassic Park novel that was never filmed at the time because it was just too complex and expensive. When we saw that it was going to be in this movie, we were all very, very excited. And we went out and found a beautiful location in Thailand for the first half of the sequence. It's a lagoon that we shot in, surrounded by these beautiful limestone cliffs. But the second half of the sequence, where the cast are paddling down a whitewater river and they get tipped out of the raft by the T-Rex and they're flowing down the river, there was nowhere safe that we could shoot that. So we actually opted to shoot it in the UK in the Olympic Whitewater Rafting Centre in Lee Valley. Reason being, we could have our cast outside in natural daylight in a real flowing body of water and get really honest reactions to, their performance. But it meant that we had to replace the entire environment digitally. We modelled a digital environment based on places we'd found in, it's sort of a collage of places between Thailand and China that exist in the real world. But one of the tricky things about the scene was that in Thailand we had hot sunny days. In the UK it was raining, it was cloudy, some days it was sunny, one day it even sleeted. So the cast were passing through sort of sunlight in one shot, shade in the next shot, sunlight in the next shot. And ILM designed a really clever lighting scheme where we had dappled light from the sun and shade cast by the trees so they could pass in and out of this. But because it was so cold when we were shooting in the UK, the cast all had to wear wetsuits covering their arms and legs to keep them safe in the water. So we had to replace all their arms from the shoulder down, and anytime we see their legs, it had to be replaced entirely digitally in post. The thing with visual effects is when people don't realize that you've done visual effects. All the hard work and love that goes into these visual effects is unsung. Nobody notices it. None of the artists get any praise for it. And one of those elements is the raft inflating and hiding the T-Rex early on in the sequence. And it was a really carefully, deliberately choreographed bit of action. And the raft had to inflate perfectly and sit on the side of the dock and then fall down. And much like a magician holding up a sheet and dropping it, the person behind is vanished and the T-Rex vanished. So we actually created a fully digital simulation of that raft. Our actress on the day mimed the performance of pulling the ripcord on the inflation bag and jumping back in fear as the raft popped up. And the artists at ILM crafted this inflation simulation as the raft popped up and sat on the side. But a lot of people that I've spoken to haven't realized that that was a digital effect. We worked on a number of new tools at ILM to help us with the creature simulation. Firstly, we brought all of our simulation tools into Houdini. Secondly, we realized that we needed a fairly unprecedented level of detail in the fine wrinkle and skin detail on the surface of the creature. We build all our creatures from the inside out. Everyone does that now. You build a skeleton, you attach a muscle system to it and a fatty layer. and then you have a fine skin sim on top of that. But what we were finding is there were limitations in the resolution of the meshes and the displacement textures that we were driving it with. So we started a new tool where we actually bake out fine wrinkle detail as a procedural displacement that we could read back in at render time. And we were baking that out as point clouds on a per frame basis. So it removed all the limitations of meshes that we previously had and just gave us this super fine or infinitely level of detail on a per frame basis for the wrinkle detail on the skin. The sequence with the titanosaurs in the tall grass was originally conceived as a much more, shall we say, active pairing of the two creatures as they were mating. So we looked around for references, again, animal references of how those creatures could perform. And we found these really intriguing videos of swans with their necks curling around each other and giraffes in sort of courtship rituals. And we used that as a basis for the animation of our titanosaurs. But then we were looking for other ways to make the scene more balletic. And the tails became a really big storytelling point. So much like Olympic ribbon dances, where the ribbons swirling gracefully, creating all these beautiful compositions through the frame, we used the dinosaurs' tails to do the same thing. And then to help with the scale, we placed tiny, tiny little white birds. We've all seen like footage of wildebeest with white egrets sitting on their backs, and we thought maybe the same thing happens with dinosaurs, and little birds come and sit on their backs and take flight. So all those details of that sort of scale and the graceful arcing of the tails and the flocks of birds flying around really helped with the scene. The scale of the dinosaurs changes in these movies dependent on the frame and the sort of energy and the emotion that you're trying to convey in that moment. And I think cinematographers and directors play with scale all the time. And whether that's due to a change in lens or framing of an object, we do the same thing with our dinosaurs. And I think that's totally fine. I've spoken a little bit about how, we believe in dinosaurs. And I think we're so intrigued by dinosaurs because they did exist. They were real animals. And so one of the things that we decided to do on this film was only animate dinosaurs if we could find a real reference of a real animal behaving in a similar way. That might be how it moved around, how it thrashed in the water, or just the sort of emotional intent that you saw in that creature, in that animal. And if we did that, if we found a piece of real animal reference to base our dinosaur movement on, Gareth was completely convinced by it. We even said to him, if we find this bit of reference, you're not allowed to change the animation. You can't direct it because you couldn't direct a real animal. You just have to live with it. You can change the angle you shoot it from. It can come in from a different side of the frame, but you cannot change its performance. And he agreed, and that stuck pretty much through the whole process. For the T-Rex, we found a number of intriguing references. So, for example, when it's lying sleeping, we started off posing it lying on its belly, as you imagine a large animal like that would lie down. And Gareth said, well, can't it be lying on its back? Like when you see dogs sleeping and they're lying on their back and their legs are kicking up in the air. And so we went looking for reference, and we actually found all this amazing reference of lions lying, sleeping on their backs and how they yawn and roll over. So we used that, and we also used reference of bears fishing in the water or wading down streams really quickly to get a sense of its weight and momentum as it plowed through all the water. We never used dinosaur footage as reference because I think we wanted to find our own inspiration. And rather than visual effects leaning on or referring to other visual effects, there's a danger that if you do that, you just water down ideas. We always try to go back to the source and look for real animals as reference.